Good evening all and welcome. Tonight's video was selected by our members through exclusive polls. If you'd like to be a member to gain access to cool perks and or a patron, you can find the link in the description. But for now it's time to get comfortable. Grab your flashlight and let the darkness take control. According to my girlfriend, who has a really hard time believing in anything supernatural, her sister has been haunted since she was a child. Everything from seeing a small child run in front of the TV, multiple people seeing the same tall man lurking in the dark, to a light bulb exploding in her bedroom and the door slamming and locking itself. The light in that room stopped working, and every electrician they hired couldn't figure out what was wrong. At the time of this story, they were in the process of moving out of the house and had no furniture left in it. Fortunately for my curiosity and the relevance of this story, she was also in the room. At this point, only me and one other person who I thoroughly trusted were in this room, holding a Ouija board, specifically the planchette, and I trusted them enough not to move it. So I asked if there was anything following her that might want to speak. My girlfriend's sister freaked out for a second and made it very clear that she did not want to be a part of this at all. But then the planchette moved to yes. We asked it a few more questions. Will you speak to us? Will you stay with us if she leaves the room? No. How old are you? 9. The question was very confusing because according to every person in the family, they'd all seen a very tall man. Does that mean she was 9 when you started following her? Yes, it replied. At this point, she noped out the room. The moment she stepped out, the planchette straight moved to goodbye, and we couldn't speak to it anymore. But then I had a great idea. Let's take the Ouija board to her house and try it there. We convinced that poor girl to come with us on the condition that she would be able to put in her headphones and drown out whatever we were saying. She didn't want to have anything to do with it. We arrived at the house and set up the board on a small island counter in the kitchen. We waited to turn the lights off, so she retreated to the kitchen pantry with another person and turned the lights on in there. Can we speak to the entity we spoke with at the last house? Yes. Are you the same entity following her around? Yes. At this point, I wanted proof. I wanted something solid that I could take away from this experience and say without a doubt that there is something beyond our understanding and point to this as proof, at least to myself. Will you move something in this room? No. Will you move something if I am the only one in this room? No. Will you move something if she was the only one here? Yes. Then I had an idea. It was crucial that nobody in the pantry hear what I was about to say, so I say it very quietly. Could you shut the pantry light off? There was a very uncomfortable silence as the other people around me waited to see what would happen. The planchette began to move to yes, but it dragged off the board and towards the pantry. There was a loud slam in the pantry. The lights went out, and everyone inside screamed and fell out. The next moment was one of panic, confusion, and, at least for me, achievement. Whatever the hell had just happened in that pantry was exactly what I had been looking for. Something real, that I could point to and say, this is how I know. After the two had caught their breath, they both told me that there was a wooden board on the top shelf leaning against the wall. According to them, the board flipped out of the wall and slammed the shelf, flipping onto the floor. If I remember correctly, it hit one of them and left a bruise. They weren't sure how the lights went out. One possibility is that in a panic to leave the room, one of them bumped against the light switch, but the moment had been too chaotic to really tell beyond a doubt why the lights switched off. 70% of the group was ready to nope out, but there were a few of us, including myself, that wanted to bring the board into the room that had the most activity. It was the same room with that light bulb that had exploded, the same room that the dogs would never go near, and the same room that children would avoid looking at when they passed. Me and 2 others decided to use the board there. Upon walking into the room, it felt like a heavy blanket had been laid upon me. It felt like the sinking feeling when the love of your life tells you to piss off. It was almost hard to breathe, like when your bathroom fills up with steam, except it was very cold. Me and the other two sat down and started asking questions, except there was something very different. Before, the planchette had been moving slowly and deliberately across the board, but now it was moving so fast that it would almost fly off the board. In fact, at one point, it slipped out from under my fingers and kept going. The last question we asked is what its name was. It began to spell out G-O-D, and at this point, two other people noped out and left the board immediately. I told it we had to go and moved it to goodbye. When we left the room, we found out that the other girl that had been in the pantry had to leave the house and was throwing up outside. When I asked her why, she said that the air had felt so heavy that she began getting nauseous. This experience was, without a doubt, the most terrifying and exhilarating of my life. It was exactly what I was looking for and more. However, one thing stuck with me that is more terrifying than anything else, even the slamming board in the pantry, the implications of which still send a wave of terror down my back at every thought. Just before I left the room, I asked if it would be willing to stay with me if she went home. It said yes. My teacher thought it was only appropriate to tell us a story about his paranormal experiences. One of them that really stuck to me was a story he was telling us about his farm his family has always lived on. He said that 8 years ago, after class was over and he'd finished his tales, one of his students came up to him and asked how his grandfather died. He told Becky that it was kidney failure. Becky said that that's what she'd suspected. Then Becky started asking about the grandfather's appearance. Did he wear overalls, have really long grey hair and facial hair, and wear glasses? At this point, the teacher is a bit creeped out and asks why she wants to know. Her response? Oh, because as you were telling the story about your grandpa, I saw him standing in the corner of the room. He wants you to call your grandma. This story happened to my friend's dad, and he isn't the guy to make stuff up, so I 100% believe him. My friend's dad, Jack, and his brother Tom lived with each other in the 80s. It was just the two of them living in the house and no one else. So this one night, Jack is coming home at night and walks into the living room to see a bunch of old people sitting around talking. As he walks in, they all quiet down and awkwardly look at him as he walks by. He doesn't see Tom anywhere, so he just assumes Tom will be back to tend to his guests. Jack has work the next morning, so he goes into his room to get some sleep, but is kept up from all the people talking. He walks out of the room and is promptly met up with Tom, who was coming out of his room to tell Jack to keep his friends quiet. However, Jack was coming out to tell Tom to keep his friends quiet. They walk out from the hallway into the living room, only to see it's empty, with the leftover smell of musk lingering in the air. I had to take care of my mentally handicapped cousin a few years back. She could get around well enough, but due to severe arthritis in her knees and ankles, she had to be watched and helped into the bath and stuff like that. I would go into her room in the morning, help her to a walker so that she could wee, and then make her breakfast. One morning I heard the water running in the bathroom, and I went in to check on her. I had to pass her room on the way to the bathroom, and when I did, I saw that she was in her rocking chair in the corner, her blanket over her head, and she was rocking back and forth. "Don't leave the water on, you're going to flood the place." I went into the bathroom to shut the faucet off, and my cousin was in there washing her face. I immediately ran back into the room, but it was just her blanket crumpled up on the rocking chair. My cousin wanted to know why I undid her bed. I didn't stay long after that. When I was little, maybe 5, I would walk into my parents' bedroom to crawl into bed with them. Many times when walking into their room, I would see a young girl in a white dress standing at the foot of the bed. I would be paralyzed with fear, but being young, I didn't think I understood what I was seeing. I would take agonizing steps forward until I would crawl into bed and then cover myself completely in their blankets. She never moved, spoke, or acknowledged my presence. She was just there. I annoyed a ghost at my old job. I was told the carousel was haunted and didn't believe them. One night, the maintenance door was open and I emptied the ride of guests, and my second insisted they hadn't opened it. I closed it, loaded guests, and it was open again. It has a turn latch that you put a padlock on, so it could only have been opened intentionally. I went inside the center of the carousel, mostly just the breaker and all the mechanical parts are in there, and switched on the light to check for a maintenance guy that hadn't talked to me. It was empty. I'm a little spooked, so I say loudly, "I'm not dealing with this crap tonight. I got an hour left to go, so get your act together," in my mum's voice. I do the safety check, start the ride, and the phone rings. When I answer, there's no one on the other end. A few minutes later, it happens again, and after I hang up, I call base to tell them something's wrong with the phone. The supervisor calls back and says sometimes the phone rings randomly and to not worry about it. I recount the tale to a co-worker and she looks at me funny. "Did you turn the lights off before the music?" "No, I need the lights on to get the switch." "Oh, well, make sure you never do that, and if the phone rings after, don't answer, just leave." I figure it's some kind of electrical shortage that causes it, and I go home. In the following days, I keep thinking I see it move out the corner of my eye, or hear it running after I've closed for the night, but shake it off. I was working 15-hour days continuously. The next time I opened the carousel, as we took turns, I go take a potty break and come back to the security guard standing next to my ride. "I saw him while you were gone. Just be careful," he says to me. "What are you talking about?" "The ride-op, the one that tries to grab operators." I try and think which of my co-workers is that rude. He then goes on to explain that one of the 3 park ghosts is attached to the carousel, and he is the only mean one and tries to grab operators and causes bad luck and rides to malfunction. Apparently I made him mad by yelling at him, and he decided to haunt the hell out of me. We joke about the little girl that lives in our house. My wife insists that she was a victim of a fire in the schoolhouse in the 1870s that was on our property before the house was built. We've never seen her, but there is the occasional door locked or unlocked, or the errant attic light on and off, and so forth. Not a presence that's very strong nor overbearing. This was one time, though, when my wife was in the kitchen, and I was coming down the stairs and we both heard, "You're a good little girl, Dottie," coming from the living room. Dottie is our dog. Trouble, but a good girl to be sure. Apparently there's one more person in the house besides my wife and I who agrees. For context, we live in an ancient coastal New England town, halfway between the sites of the massacre of the Nagargarsets and the site of the Pequots. So although there are probably countless ghosts of native folks throughout our land, we are not apt to listen to them. The girl in our house is probably just one of the settlers in our town, of one of their descendants. My mum thought she saw a ghost. She went outside around 10 p.m. for a cig years ago and saw a very elderly woman walking up to our neighbours' back stairs to their veranda. Mum says she wanted to ask if she was alright, as it was very rare for our neighbours to have visitors that late. They were also elderly, but Mum said she completely lost her voice and felt stunned, though she couldn't look away. She ended up getting out a "hello," and the woman just disappeared. The next morning, Mum made a joke to our neighbours asking why she wasn't invited over for their nightcap with their visitor, and they very casually replied, "Oh, so you've seen our ghost too?" They were excited over it and not remotely scared. Barry, the neighbor, says an elderly lady follows his wife, Elwyn, everywhere, and they feel pure comfort around her, but their own children and grandchildren are frightened by the lady on the stairs when they stay. What I'm about to tell you took place when I was 11 years old. I'm currently 48, but the memory never faded. At the time, my 2 older brothers shared a room together, and I shared not only a bedroom with my older sister, but the bed as well. I was the baby. One night I awoke suddenly to the street lamp, red alarm clock, digits glaring at me in the eye. 2:58 a.m. As my eyes began to adjust to the darkened room, I noticed the pale blue moonlight streaming through the windows, landing across the foot of the bed. As I continued to survey the room, my eyes fully adjusted. Movement caught my attention. I quickly pulled my feet up to my legs, as I felt someone sitting down towards the bottom of my side of the bed. I have a hard time believing what I saw that night, even to this day, but here it goes. At the foot of my bed was this thing, with legs, arms, and a body that was oddly shaped, distorted-like, as if they were trying to transform into something else. The figure was dark, but not so dark that I couldn't make out its facial features. Eyes, or should I say where the eyes should be. There were 2 round, even darker holes. It felt as if I were looking into the depths of 2 deep wells. The nose was elongated and wide, with a pronounced hump at the center of it. The mouth appeared to be nothing more than a slit. Even though I was focused on the basic nothingness of the face, I could tell the body was still shifting, still moving, as if trying to find a form. I tightly closed my eyes, hoping that what I was seeing was a mere trick of the light. But no, it was still there. I began gently kicking up my sister and quietly saying her name, scared that this thing at the end of my bed would hear me or see what I was doing. Then I heard it. A low, guttural laugh. I could feel my body tense even more, fear rushing through my veins. I closed my eyes as tightly as I could again, but this time when I opened them, the thing had moved closer to me. It felt like my heart dropped deep within my stomach, and I immediately became nauseous. I could hear something coming from its direction, but I couldn't make out what it was. Again I heard this thing begin to laugh, or more so giggling this time, as I shut my eyes out of pure terror from the sound, not realizing I had done so. I really wish I hadn't done that. I began kicking my sister much harder now and saying her name aloud. My eyes still shut tight. I could hear that sound again. It was closer now and resembled something of a low rumble, or a hum. Terrified to open my eyes, and terrified not to, I decided to open them. What I saw will forever be imprinted in my brain. It was so close to me that I could reach out and touch it. The slit for a mouth was now trembling like an earthworm wiggling through the ground. I watched in horror as its hollow eyes grew rounder and began to take over its face. The trembling mouth, as well as beginning to grow larger. It was at this point that I finally realized what the sound was. The distorted body wasn't distorted at all. It was a horde of rats scurrying on top of each other, on top of that thing. The holes in its face were growing larger because the rats were running out of them. I can't tell you for how long I was frozen with sheer fright staring at it. I began to scream at some point, which finally woke up my sister as bright lights flooded the room. She stood in the doorway with her eyes wide, hand over heart, asking me what was wrong. It was gone. I began frantically looking, my eyes bouncing in all directions, but it had left. At this point, my sister was comforting me, soothing me with, "Shh, it'll be alright, sis." And I recall falling back asleep, holding on with a death grip to my sister's arm. I'm not sure why, but my sister chose not to ask me what had frightened me so badly that night. The next morning brought sunshine and a Saturday morning, a favorite of every 11-year-old. I immediately thought of the thing that had terrorized me the night before, and after giving it some thought, I decided that it must have been a very realistic nightmare. I walked out my bedroom and started down the hall towards the TV room, when I overheard my mum speaking to someone from her bedroom. As I drew closer, I realized she was on the telephone. What I heard sent a long, cold shiver down my spine. I think it was a demon. It stood in the corner of my bedroom whispering that it was going to take my children one by one, and it had rats running all over it. The days when I used to play with the man in the closet. They go back to a time where everything was unclear, yet out of all the things to remember, that man has always been in my memories. Always has, and always will be. My first encounter with this man I remember clear as day. My family had just moved into a house in the States. It was my first time being in the States, and I was 5 years old. And for some strange reason, I was excited more than anything. My little brother was running around the house. I called him, and he came over to me. I asked him if he wanted to play a game, and we decided to play hide and seek, and he went to hide while I counted to 20. When I got done counting, I went to look for him. I couldn't find him, so I started yelling, "Raymond, where are you?" I went to the very top of the house, the 3rd floor, and I thought to look in the closet. He wasn't there, but I did find something. A door. There was a door inside the closet. For some reason I thought to open it. I was only 5 and curiosity got the best of me. So I opened the door, and inside it was nothing more than an empty room. Except for a desk, a man, and his typewriter. I walked up to him and asked, "Why are you in my house?" He looked at me surprised as he couldn't believe I'd found this room. He just said, "Jose, you're not supposed to be in here." I asked him who he was, and his only response was, "Jose, shouldn't you be looking for your brother? I bet he's worried about you." I looked at him, and he looked back, and I remember that he seemed quite average. Nothing about him was strange other than the fact that he was wearing all white. He held my hand and told me that I should keep looking for my brother. He opened the door and closed it behind me. I didn't think much of it, as I was only 5, so I went looking for my brother and found him in the kitchen under the sink. I never told him about the man in the closet, mostly because I wanted the man in the closet to be my friend, not his. My little brother did not know about this man till I was about 12, and he 11. Anyway, that was the first time I met him, although it was not the last. I remember there were 2 other occasions. The second time I met him I remember quite clearly. I remember it because my mother was fighting with my stepdad. I couldn't leave the house, so I hid inside the closet. Just so I wouldn't have to hear them, you see. My little brother was at my aunt's house, and my only guess is that they forgot I was in the house at all. It had been weeks, and I had tried to visit the man in the closet, but time after time I would look and the door wouldn't be there. But this time was different. This time he opened the door and I saw the light from the floor. He told me to get inside quick, and I did. I have no idea how long I was in there for, and for some strange reason I trusted him. I never questioned how he knew my name without telling him. I never asked him for his. Maybe I did. Perhaps it's one of the few things I don't remember of him. The only somewhat personal thing I know about this man is that he was from Germany. After talking for what felt like hours, he told me it was fine to leave. He held my hand and opened the door. "Everything's going to be fine, Jose. It might look like it's always going to be like this, but don't worry. Keep your chin up, okay?" As soon as he led me out, he closed the door behind me, and when I looked back, the door was gone. I walked out of my closet, and it turns out I was in the closet for almost 3 hours, and my mother had been looking for me. I told her I'd been in the closet the whole time, but she said she'd already looked in there, and I wasn't. To this day, she still thinks I lied about it to her. Days passed by, and I tried to see him again. I went to the closet to see if he was there almost every day from the day I saw him to the last. The door behind the closet just seemed to never show up anymore, until the very last day at the house when we were moving. My little brother was downstairs with my mother and I just wanted to check one last time. I told my mum that I'd be back. I'd left a toy in my room, and I went to my room and checked the closet. I saw the door behind the clothes in the closet, so I went to open it, and when I walked in, he was typing away on his typewriter. I asked him why he hadn't been around, and he just looked at me with a face that said, "It hurts inside." I looked at him and said, "I thought you were going to be here for me." He kept looking right back at me with a face and just said, "I'm sorry." He didn't have to say anything, but he did stand up and uttered a few words. It wasn't in English. In fact, if I really think about it, it probably was German. Then he held out his hand and walked me out the room. When I finally got out the closet, my mum had gone crazy looking for me. Turns out I was in that closet for a long time, at least 2 hours, and my mum was on the verge of calling the cops. I remember it clearly, like the other times, except this time was different. This time was the last time I saw him. The man in the closet, the man in all white. The man, for whatever reason, I could only see. I wish I could find out who he was. I still think about him every now and then, mostly because deep down in my heart, no matter how hard I try to deny it, I know this man was real. Even now, I just get goosebumps, because maybe he's still watching me. I think he knows I'm still here. That's what really gets to me. My parents' house has a ghost. When my sister, who's now 42, was 5, she started talking about the Green Lady. Of course, us older 3 sisters made fun of her a lot. She continued for several years talking about the Green Lady. Then one day when I was 48 in middle school, I went upstairs and heard a swooshing sound. I turned to see what it was, and there was this lady with a long green dress from like the 1800s and dark hair tied up very pretty. Then, just like that, she was gone. I never saw her again after that. But my mum took in a little boy for a while for a family that needed us when I was in high school, and he always talked to a lady upstairs when he was alone. He was only 3 when he stayed with us. Also, lots of weird things happened in my parents' house. Cupboards would open and shut on their own, and the water faucets would turn on and off by themselves. I don't know the history of our house before it was built, but it would have been newly claimed land in the 1800s. Not to mention the fact that my sister, when she was 5 or 6, shared a bedroom with me. She would wake up screaming, saying there was a dark man in our closet. My parents would have to come in to calm her down. I never saw that, but she saw the dark figure. She was petrified of the dark figure, but perfectly fine with the Green Lady. I don't tell this story often, because at 48 it still sends chills down my spine. I often wonder if the dark figure in the closet isn't responsible for the death of the Green Lady. My facility is fairly new, but has plenty of quirks. 95% of the paranormal or creepy things are just normal part of the building's function. The other 5%, though, have no explanation that I've been able to find in our 4 years of employment, and no one in maintenance or exhibits can give a good answer for either, and they've tried. It was built in a formerly economically depressed part of the city before the area was gentrified, and some of that shows through in the weirdest ways. So occasionally we get this weird cloud of odor that just pops up and sticks around for a bit and then leaves. It could be anywhere in the building at any time and lasts for any length of time, and it smells like weed. Strong weed. I thought someone had dumped their stash next to an intake vent at first, but the first time I knew something was up, I was working second shift with a co-worker at about 10:30 at night. He's on a catwalk about 80 feet above the ground and reports a smell like someone smoking had just walked past him. We followed the smell for 2 hours before it vanished. What we determined was this: a sphere odor about 2.5 to 3 feet in diameter hovering about 5 feet in the air, was moving back and forth across the catwalk at a leisurely walking pace. Not like air currents. It was like a dude was pacing casually on a smoke break for 2 hours. We chalked it up to a ghost and left and went about our night. 14 months later, I was working alone in our command center at 4 a.m. It was the dead of night, raining outside, and there had been no one around the building since midnight. In the span of about 6 to 7 seconds, the air went from normal office smell to hotboxing with a hippie for 3 days smell. It was so strong that it made me gag, and I was legit worried about catching a high contact off it. After 2 minutes of me checking cameras and videos around any intake vents, it just disappeared. Not like the air ducts were cleaned out, or like a filter started working again, just like it showed up 3 or 4 seconds between me noticing it and was letting up, and it was totally gone, like it had never been there. It happened a few times since then, but these are the most memorable events. I was very young, probably only 4 at the time. My family were visiting relatives in a house they were staying in temporarily. My mother tells me the whole thing seemed very off from the get-go. The house was pretty old, though I'm not sure how old, and my grandparents must have been sensing something there from the start based on their reactions, but I'll get to that in a while. Anyway, my brothers and I were playing in the living room of the house, and apparently both my brother and I separately went to my mother and asked her about the man in the window. I vaguely remember seeing the outline of a man's shadow against the window, but I don't remember any details. I wish my memory were better, but hey, I was 4. My brother was asking, why aren't we talking to him? To give a bit of context, our family is massive. We have tons of extended family, cousins, aunts, uncles, etc. So it was not uncommon for us kids to meet complete strangers at family gatherings, which is why my brothers and I were not terrified of said strange man. My mother looked in the living room and saw no one and asked my brother where the man was. Over there against the wall by the window, he replied, and pointed to an area where the man was. At this point my mother was confused, and my grandmother overheard the conversation and came over to us. What is it? She asked, and my mother explained what we were saying about the man. She immediately got a bottle of anointing oil and went through the entire house praying and putting oil above every doorway. My grandfather was previously the pastor of a Methodist church, so it was a reflex action that anything even remotely like a ghost or demon had to go. I should mention here that supposedly, and I say this because I don't know if I believe it or not, the bottle of oil my grandmother has is special because, get this, it's empty. Yes, she keeps a small empty glass bottle in her purse, and apparently whenever she needs to anoint something or someone, there will be oil in it. I don't know if I believe this or not, but I digress. After the house was prayed over by them, I believe we had group prayer and we couldn't see the man anymore. Honestly, I wish my memory from the experience were better, so I could describe him to you all. However, since it was not a traumatic experience or even something my mind could comprehend at the time, I don't remember much at all. Most of the details are from what my mother told me years later. In preschool, I would always hang out with a girl named Alex. She was my best friend at the time, and I would always go home and tell my mum what Alex and I did that day. But my mum got worried because I told her Alex would always wear the same clothes to school every day. At a parent-teacher conference, my mum brought in clothes for Alex, but my teacher said that they didn't have an Alex at the class, but they had noticed that I was talking to someone who wasn't there. One of the teachers told us about how there was an Alex in class last year, but she had died of cancer, if I remember correctly. A brain-related disease, and she brought out a picture of Alex, and I confirmed that was my friend that I'd been talking to. We got paranormal experts involved in everything, and they suggested that I told Alex that I couldn't play with her anymore to prevent her from getting too attached to me. So I did, and I never saw Alex again after that. Most of what I know of the story is what my parents told me, but I vividly remember Alex. It's nothing that scares me. It's pretty cool really that I was the one she decided to hang out with at her old preschool. I've worked at a vet clinic for 4 years now. There was a clinical cat called Jingles who ended up passing overnight. It was really sad for all of us. Jingles was a real character, serious mischievous little thing. She passed December 24th, 2018. And ever since that day, we've all had an experience with Jingles. I was the one working Christmas, so sadly I found her. I called my co-workers to come and say goodbye, and started filling out the cremation paperwork. I walked away from the computer for just a moment to just breathe. Came back, and there was a bunch of random letters where I was typing. Jingle was notorious for walking and laying on any keyboard that she saw in use. Always was messing up our notes. I was speechless. I didn't even want to delete the letters. A few weeks later, I'm alone taking care of the boarders for the weekend. I had these 4 small dogs who were always very good and pretty quiet, so they would bark when I came in but quieted down when they realized it's me. So I come in, they bark for a few minutes, then they calm down, and I was finishing mopping the floor around their kennels when 2 of them just go insane. They were both looking at the same area of the room, howling and barking like I've never heard them bark before. Jingles would stand right where they were, look and tease dogs. She was so unafraid of everything, it worried me sometimes. I said, "Jingles, you troublemaker, go to bed." And like 30 seconds later they stopped barking and were all totally fine. Had to be Jingles. I know these dogs well, and they are very calm for the most part. This other one is pretty funny. I smelled her ghost poop. Her poops were some of the nastiest smelling poops I've ever encountered, and I've smelled a lot of poops in my days. All I can say is her poops were foul enough to recognize. I walked into her old room where no cat had been in months to clean it for the new cat. And I was hit with her nasty poop stench. I've gone in there many times before to store things, so I know it wasn't always smelling like her poop. Even when she was alive, it didn't always smell like her poop. I had my co-workers come into the room and they agreed it was her foul poop. Jingles took a little ghost dookie. I'll end this with our new client, cat, Ramen. We constantly see him playing like there's another cat with him. He stands on his hind legs, swatting at nothing, and acts like he's pouncing on something that isn't there, stalks something that isn't there, and pretty much everything 2 cats would do together is what we see Ramen do with nothing. It's pretty interesting to watch, and we all agree Jingles is definitely still around. She knocks over alcohol bottles, squats Q-tips off the counter. Sometimes dogs on the table will have a reaction like a cat just jumped up next to them. Love you, Jingles. You're one hell of a cat. I grew up with a strange mum. We don't really talk anymore. She was a paranormal investigator while I was growing up. There are loads of stories there. When I was about 3, there is video footage of me coming downstairs as angry as I could be. Not a temper tantrum, pissed. In the video I kept yelling at my mum that they won't let me play with my toys. She tried to ask me who, and I just kept angrily yelling, telling her that they wouldn't let me play with my toys. We didn't get a cat until I was 4 before that, and there was some kind of cat creature in the house. I had seen it in my mother's closet once. Another time I remember being awoken in the middle of the night by a cat yowling in my playroom, which is the next room over, and I could see a shadow under the door before I opened it and heard a hiss. Upon opening the door, there was nothing there. As I got older, things got stranger. After my mother got back from the catfish plantation, strange things started happening. We could hear someone running up and down the stairs at night. Shoes would be thrown down the stairs, and my most vivid memory of the time was me sitting on my mum's bed. We had no pets at the time, and it was just me and her. Her bathroom was attached to their bedroom, and she was the kind of woman that had 20 almost empty bottles on the side of the tub. While watching Barney one day, it sounded as if someone had struck their arm out and just swiped all the bottles into the tub at once. My mother came around the corner yelling, "Jeremy!" It turns out Jeremy was the name of a young man who was the slave at the plantation she had visited. He had fallen off the back of a hay wagon and died. After that day, she got back in her car, drove back to the plantation, and all the strange things stopped. Also, she now believes she's an alien. So there's a whole other story there. Also, we don't speak anymore. She tried to tell my son could heal himself of hepatitis C, that his birth mum gave him, and I hung up on the crazy lady and haven't talked to her since. She also believes that the alien encryption sun god Ra isn't sending her messages and that we're about to move into the fourth form of being. She thinks it's her job to let people know. By now, she might be running a cult. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. My mom worked day shift at a hospital for a while, and she would leave before 7 a.m, so my sister and I would take turns lying with the dog when she'd leave, because he couldn't be shut in her room alone. Anyway, my mum and I would often feel a small animal, specifically a cat, walking on the mattress near our legs and curl up next to us. We didn't have cats at that point. Nothing was ever on the bed when we'd check. One day my sister and I were talking with Mum in her room when she started banging on the side of her recliner, where she was sitting, and yelling at the dog to go away. She crawled out from the other side of the bed. When she went to extend the leg rest of the recliner, a shadow darted out from underneath and zipped across the room. We all saw it. We think it was one of our late cats who died around Halloween 2005, because he was very close to her before my younger sister and I were born. About a week and a half ago, I was stopping by my house with a friend to pick up something I had forgotten. It was pretty late on a Saturday night, maybe 11 p.m, and while we were driving away, my friend looked towards my bedroom window and then turned to me to ask, "When did you get a white cat?" I don't own a white cat. The only cat that he could have seen was my cat who lives in my bedroom, but he's completely black. As soon as I told my friend that we don't have a white cat, he began to get freaked out and told me he saw a white cat in my window. Later, when we were in my room again, I wanted some clarification on this. White cat? Because I was having trouble believing him, and I asked my friend, could it have been a cat outline, maybe the curtain? And he replied, no, because I made eye contact and it was watching us drive away. My friend's hesitancy to even go back to my house provided for some convincing, along with the fact that he seemed to have made eye contact with the thing. I later spoke to my mom about the incident, and she appeared to have a decently thorough explanation. My black cat used to have a brother who died about a year ago from kidney failure. While this cat was still alive, he took care of my black cat, treated him as how a brother should treat a younger, weird runt of a sibling. Also, this cat was primarily white. He had a white coat with some black splotches on his back, solid black paws, and a spotch of black on his face. As my mum's explanation went, my cat was probably visiting his older brother, and that's the cat my friend saw. However, my friend said that the cat he saw didn't have black spots on its face, so he either just didn't see it, or the cat didn't have it. Another experience related to this is one night when my girlfriend was over, she exclaimed to have felt something at the foot of the bed. She explained this to me the following morning so that I wouldn't freak out, because she knew this whole ghost cat thing was sketching me out. But anyway, she described that it felt like a cat was curled up at the foot of the bed, at the corner, which wouldn't normally be weird because that's where my cat normally sleeps, except that my cat was next to us, not at the foot of the bed. She said that her foot bumped into a spot that felt like there was pressure, as if something was sitting there. She tested it again by lifting the blanket with her foot to see if she could move it from where this thing happened to be sitting, but something was holding the blanket down. At that point, she got freaked out. So yeah, there's my long story about our ghost cat visitations. It's not necessarily scary, but nevertheless, it's an experience that takes a lot of courage to believe. I think a cat was haunting our old place. I never owned the cat that's haunting us. My mailman has seen it as well as other neighbours, and he commented on what a gorgeous big marmalade cat we had that he saw at the window when he dropped off the mail, and wanted to know if said kitty was a boy because he had a girl getting fixed soon and was considering having a litter before the procedure. We told him we have a tuxedo kitty and a tortoiseshell kitty, no large marmalade. I think we hurt his feelings and he thought we were lying. He wasn't the same to us after that. My neighbours have complimented the big bright orange cat in the window. We know the previous owners never had cats, only dogs. My brother lives in another town, and when visiting him I actually saw the damn thing and thought it was real. I saw it and my first logical thought was, hey, where the hell is the litter box? If he has a cat, he'd have one, and food. I was convinced his carpets were going to go to crap and mentioned that when he came out the shower. He looked at me like I had 3 heads. I found out later from a girl who stayed that she saw it once as well. So did it follow me from my home to my brother's? We have no info on the people who lived there previously. No one in my family has ever owned a cat like that, and I only saw it the once, but people still see it on occasion. Oh, and having crazy tortoise shells, we have no clue if the live kitties interact with the dead kitties, because they are notoriously nuts. My mum used to take in strays and try to find homes for them, but it got pretty out of hand at one point. The neighbour's dog, who was always outside and no one took care of, spread fleas to my mum's dog, which infected all the cats she was caring for. It was so bad and overwhelmed the cats that they never wanted to be on the floor, despite the fact that she had been trying desperately to get the problem under control. One night, one of the cats must have been sitting on the top of the kitchen cabinets and jumped down, somehow turning on the stove and causing the kitchen to catch fire. My mum almost died, and none of the cats survived. So last night, after I put the kids to bed, I went downstairs to smoke a cig in the kitchen. I swear I could hear a cat grooming itself and walking on the hardwood floor. I called to my cat and shook the chain on the laser pointer as he loves that thing, but nothing. I brushed it off until I kept hearing it. Finally, before I went back to bed, I called my cat one more time and could hear his bell jingling as he ran down the stairs. It freaked me out a little bit, and certainly was weird. Hey guys, it's Mort here. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's tales. If of course you did, well, you know what to do. You know, the typing and the liking, all of that's down below. Huge thanks to my members and patrons whose names are on screen now. For all your continued support. It really does mean a lot. And if you'd like to donate a small amount of money every month and also get prizes for doing so, you know, you can do that. I'd appreciate it. And who knows, maybe you'll feel really good about yourself afterwards. Alright then guys, it's been fun and spooky, so hopefully I'll see you soon. Remember that 73% of you aren't even subscribed, so subscribe. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.